What are the constraints in providing better transport services in Myanmar? What are the possible mechanisms to support the efforts of the government, both technically and financially, in transport sector development? We intend to find answers to these questions over the course of the next 10 minutes. According to the Global Competitiveness Report in 2014-15, out of 144 countries, the state of Myanmar's infrastructure was ranked 137th. Quality of overall infrastructure was ranked even lower at 138th. In a scale of 1 to 7, with 1 being the lowest in the world, infrastructure in Myanmar was the lowest at 2.05 among emerging and developing Asian countries. The Global Competitiveness Report showed that the quality of road infrastructure in Myanmar was ranked among the bottom third at 134th out of 144 economies. The state of railroad infrastructure in Myanmar is extremely underdeveloped, with a Global Competitiveness Report index score of 1.8, despite the government's expansion program by about 3,500 kilometers in the past 2 decades. So how does Myanmar compare to its neighbors in terms of its infrastructure development? For a country with a land area spanning 676,000 square kilometers and a population of 65 million, road density of 2,000 kilometers per 1,000 people is relatively low, both in terms of total road length and the extent of higher standard roads. This is more than 5 times lower than the overall ASEAN road density of 11,000 kilometers per 1,000 people. Vehicle density is relatively low among ASEAN countries. In 2010, the ratio of vehicle owners per 1,000 people was only 38 in Myanmar. In contrast, vehicle density in Indonesia and Thailand were 250 and 370 per 1,000 people respectively. Now that we are familiar with how Myanmar compares with its neighbors, let's take a look at the analytical framework that shows some of the causes of this underdevelopment in the transport sector. Understanding the causes will help us in addressing the underdevelopment in road and rail transport in Myanmar. To address this problem, our overall objective is to improve accessibility to market, employment, and quality of life. In order to achieve this objective, we aim to provide sufficient access for every region and state throughout Myanmar, and to promote equal development for every region and state. There are 3 possible causes that have led to the underdevelopment in the transportation sector in Myanmar. The first problem affecting Myanmar's transport sector is the agency problem. Transportation in Myanmar does not have a single agency with overall responsibility for the sector, but instead is supervised by 6 overlapping ministries. There are no clear lines for responsibility. For example, road-related activities fall under 3 ministries: the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Construction, and the Ministry of Rail Transportation. The Ministry of Rail Transportation and the Ministry of Transport include many departments and state transport enterprises, each vertically integrated with the ministry. The second important issue is the absence of a coherent, comprehensive, and integrated strategy in the transportation sector. Due to the lack of an overarching transport strategy, government plans for the sector are essentially lists of subsector construction and maintenance projects. These projects are neither coordinated nor are they integrated with the country's overall development plan. There is no comparative cost-benefit analysis for determining which projects should be given priority. Inter-agency coordination is also lacking. For example, the Ministry of Construction operates under a 30-year plan, which commenced in 2000 and is being implemented in 5-year increments. This also appears to be the procedure for other transport ministries and agencies, leading to a fragmented approach to sector planning and management. The other factor stifling the growth of the transport sector is underinvestment, both public and private, in the sector. One challenge comes from the restriction in the construction of transport infrastructure. These activities are not expressly referred to in the new notification, which was issued by the Myanmar Investment Commission in 2014, to clarify the activities in which foreign investment is prohibited or restricted. Although 100% foreign investment in certain activities relating to the construction of railways and related infrastructure and services are now permitted, it must be undertaken by way of a joint venture with Myanmar citizens with the approval of the government and Ministry of Railways. With regards to road transportation, budget limitations are severe. In 2011, the budgetary allocation for the primary and secondary road network, for which the Ministry of Construction is responsible, was about $300 million, or about $8,500 per kilometer. Since the bulk of this was for new road construction to interconnect the country, little remained for maintenance. Nonetheless, maintenance is generally adequate on the core network given the present low levels of traffic. This situation will change rapidly as traffic volumes and heavy loads increase. Talking about rail networks, most of the new lines, several of which parallel new roads, are in mountainous terrain and have been very expensive to construct. Remaining funds for maintaining and improving the existing core network have been extremely limited. As a result, the rail network is in poor condition. Further, the operating assets, including locomotives, passenger and freight cars, and signaling and communication systems, require substantial investment. Despite the extensive investment in new rail lines, the subsector's relative importance is slipping. So, how do we solve Myanmar's transport infrastructure deficit? The Asian Development Bank has identified key sector strategies for the development of the sector, and we propose a few sector strategies that are consistent with this framework. These policy options are then assessed within the framework of the 6 principles of a good public policy, such as efficiency, equity, security, political acceptability, robustness, and last, environmental sustainability. Moreover, the 5 C's of Reinventing Government by Osborne and Plastrick will be used for policy assessment. The first policy option is to formulate a coherent, comprehensive, and integrated transport plan. This all-encompassing policy option yields high efficiency ratings in terms of the 5 principles of a good public policy, as well as a high robustness rating, which simply means that it has a high likelihood of withstanding the test of time. The impact of these policy options in terms of the security principle, or simply the improvement of the quality of life, and ecological sustainability principle, are secondary or indirect effects when these policies have been adopted and implemented. The second policy option is to mandate a lead agency with overall responsibility for the transport sector. Again, this policy option yields a high rating in terms of the efficiency and robustness principles, as well as a moderate to high rating in security and ecological sustainability once this is implemented. However, this policy would generate a low to moderate rating in the political acceptability principle, as it would re-engineer the bureaucracy and would most likely encounter resistance from vested interest groups both within the institution and outside. Third policy option is to develop capacity building for institutional and human resources. Similar to the previous 2 policy options, institutional and human resource capacity building achieves a high rating in both efficiency and robustness principles, and a moderate to high rating in its secondary effects to improving quality of life and ecological sustainability principles. As this policy would challenge deep-rooted obsolete knowledge and practices, we expect it to encounter a moderate to low rating in political acceptability principle, as the more senior officials may be likely to resist new learning and technology. The fourth policy option is to promote public-private partnerships. Similar to the previous 3 policy options, promoting public-private partnerships has favorable ratings in the efficiency, robustness, security, and ecological sustainability principles. However, we expect an initial resistance from agencies that have been accustomed to their functions for decades, thus the moderate to low rating for political acceptability principle. While the current political and economic context of Myanmar is encouraging, given its openness to pursue reforms, implementation of such reforms must be sensitive to interest group resistance, either from within institutions that have been in charge of managing different subsectors for decades, or outside institutions where economic players have been enjoying rents from the current structure. As such, a gradual phasing in of reforms is critical for political acceptability. Because reforms are to be introduced in a gradual manner, we expect a higher political support for these reforms. In terms of the 5 C's of reinventing government, the policy option of having a coherent, comprehensive, and integrated transport plan would meet the core strategy of the 5 C's that involves the clarity of purpose and of role. Mandating a lead agency with overall responsibility for the transport sector and developing institutional and human resource capacity building would again satisfy all the 5 C's of reinventing government. Further, the last option of promoting public-private partnership would satisfy all the 5 C's of reinventing government, in particular, empowering community involvement in public infrastructure projects.